The clock on the break room wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Vanessa Miller signed out of her shift at St. Clair Regional Medical Center. Her name, written in black ink, was the last entry on the sheet. The ward was quiet, the kind of silence that comes only after long hours of steady exhaustion. Her thermos still sat on the counter, half full of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. Vanessa did not notice it when she picked up her coat and keys. Her shoes left faint prints on the polished floor as she walked toward the back exit. Security cameras caught her moving down the hallway, head slightly bowed, bag over her shoulder. Outside, the November air was sharp. The parking lot lights buzzed faintly, throwing long white beams over a thin layer of frost. Vanessa's breath showed in short clouds as she walked toward her blue sedan. She pressed the key fob once. The lights blinked, but the sound of the unlocking door was the only noise in the still night. Her last known moments were ordinary. She placed her bag on the passenger seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, and started the car. The clock on the dashboard read 11:49 p.m. The engine idled for a moment, and then the car eased out of the lot and turned toward Route 25. No one saw her again. When Vanessa failed to report for her next morning shift, the charge nurse assumed she had called in sick. Her reliability had never been questioned. By afternoon, when no call came and her phone went unanswered, concern began to grow. It was her sister, Mary Ann, who finally reported her missing at 7:30 that evening. Detective Alan Reeves from the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office was assigned the case. The first step was to retrace her route home, a 10-minute drive north through the quiet streets of Port Huron. Just 2 miles from the hospital, on a narrow side road near an abandoned gas station, officers found her car. The vehicle was parked neatly along the shoulder, as if placed there intentionally. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside, her purse sat on the passenger seat, untouched. Her wallet, identification, and hospital badge were still inside. The engine was off, the keys missing. Reeves ordered the area secured. Flashlights cut through the cold night air as officers combed the roadside. The frost had hardened the soil, making footprints almost invisible. A K-9 unit searched the nearby field, but lost the scent within minutes. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, and no evidence of forced entry. The car was towed for forensic examination. Technicians dusted the door handle and steering wheel. Only one partial fingerprint was recovered. Smudged, incomplete, impossible to match with the technology available in 1999. Detective Reeves stood by the car as the tow truck's lights blinked red and white across the frozen grass. The air smelled of gasoline and metal. He wrote one sentence in his notebook. Last seen leaving work at 11:47 p.m. It was all they had. Back at the hospital, Reeves interviewed the night staff. Everyone remembered Vanessa as calm, tired, and ready to go home. She had not mentioned plans, arguments, or unusual encounters. Her locker remained untouched. The half-finished thermos was still where she left it. Security footage showed her walking alone toward the parking lot. No one followed her. No other cars left at the same time. It was as if she had driven into darkness and vanished. By midnight, police expanded the search radius. Patrols checked nearby motels, gas stations, and rest stops. Nothing surfaced. Her phone was found in her apartment, plugged in beside her bed, the alarm still set for 5:30 a.m. Reporters began to gather by the hospital entrance the next morning. The headline in the Port Huron Daily Times read, "Nurse missing after late shift." Colleagues described her as quiet, dependable, and devoted. The hospital administration released a short statement offering full cooperation with authorities. Within 24 hours, the search widened into the wooded edges near Route 25. Helicopters scanned the shoreline of Lake Huron. The water below reflected the gray winter sky, empty and cold. But the search yielded nothing. No witnesses, no tire tracks, no signs of a crash. The timeline between 11:49 p.m. and midnight became a void, a gap that no one could fill. That night, Detective Reeves stood again near the site where her car was found. The frost had thickened into ice. The wind from the lake howled through the dead trees. He looked at the vacant space beside the road and knew that whatever happened to Vanessa Miller began here. The case file opened that night with a single unanswered question written across the first page. Where did she go after she turned onto Route 25? It would take 22 years before anyone would know the truth. Vanessa Miller was 35 years old. A registered nurse at St. Clair Regional Medical Center, she had worked the night shift for almost a decade. Colleagues described her as calm under pressure, the kind of person who could hold a patient's hand through pain and never lose focus. Her uniform was always pressed, her voice measured, and her handwriting precise. She lived alone in a small apartment on the north side of Port Huron, just a few streets from Lake Huron's gray shoreline. The building was quiet, filled mostly with retirees. Her neighbors rarely saw her except on weekends when she tended to her balcony plants. Inside, her home was simple. A few framed photographs, neatly stacked medical journals, and a cat named Oliver that often waited by the window when she came home from work. Her life followed a strict rhythm. Early morning jogs through the park before sunrise. Double shifts when the hospital was short-staffed. Volunteer work on weekends at a community clinic. There was no drama, no unusual behavior, no sign of hidden trouble. Her co-workers said she rarely spoke about her personal life, but she was kind to everyone. Friends remembered her for her discipline and quiet warmth. Marianne, her younger sister, often joked that Vanessa's life ran like a chart. Meals. At the same time, laundry every Friday, calls to their parents every Sunday. Her steadiness made her disappearance feel impossible. People like Vanessa did not simply disappear. They lived predictable, careful lives built around service and responsibility. Detective Alan Reeves reviewed her background carefully. No criminal record. No debt. No secret relationships. Her bank statements showed nothing unusual. A routine grocery purchase, gas, a donation to a local shelter. Her internet history was unremarkable. Her last emails were to co-workers about scheduling. Nothing hinted at danger. In her locker at the hospital, investigators found only practical things: a stethoscope, extra scrubs, a half-read novel, and a handwritten note reminding herself to pick up cat food. Nothing more. Reeves noted that she was well-liked but not deeply known. Her co-workers respected her, but none claimed to be close friends. Outside the hospital, her world seemed small: family, work, and the quiet comfort of routine. It was this normalcy that made her case so difficult. There were no grudges, no enemies, and no obvious motives. When detectives mapped her final hours, everything aligned too perfectly. The completed shift, the logged-out time, the drive home, and then silence. Marianne told reporters later that her sister's disappearance felt like a hole opening in plain daylight. It was not just loss, it was confusion. How could someone who lived so carefully vanish without leaving a single clue? The community clung to the image of Vanessa in her blue uniform, walking down sterile hospital corridors, unaware of the danger that would soon erase her from that world. The question lingered in every report, every interview, every whispered conversation in Port Huron. How could someone so ordinary, so steady, vanish so completely? The temperature dropped below freezing on the night of November 12, 1999. The hospital parking lot was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights flickering against the frost. Security footage from the side corridor captured Vanessa Miller leaving the building at exactly 11:47 p.m. She moved with her usual calm pace. Her bag over her shoulder, coat zipped to the collar. At 11:49 p.m., she entered the staff parking area. The grainy footage showed her unlocking her car and stepping inside. The camera angle did not capture the surrounding lot, and no other vehicles appeared within range. That was the last confirmed image of her alive. When Vanessa failed to arrive home, no one noticed immediately. Her sister called her phone at 7 down the next morning. It rang twice before going to voicemail. By mid-afternoon, hospital staff realized she had missed her next shift without notice, something she had never done in 11 years of nursing. At 7:30 p.m. on November 13th, the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office issued a missing person report. Detective Alan Reeves took command of the investigation and began tracing her route home. It was a familiar drive, a straight stretch north along Route 25, bordered by thin woods and open fields. Just 2 miles from the hospital, an officer spotted a blue sedan pulled neatly onto the shoulder near an abandoned gas station. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside sat Vanessa's purse on the passenger seat, her wallet, hospital badge, and personal items untouched. The engine was off. The keys were missing. The ground surrounding the car was hard with frost. Officers searched for footprints, tire tracks, or signs of a struggle. None were found. A thin layer of ice covered the nearby grass, glistening under flashlight beams. The car's headlights were off, and the fuel gauge showed half a tank. Detective Reeves ordered the perimeter sealed. Yellow tape fluttered against the cold wind as crime scene technicians documented the scene. They photographed the car from every angle and collected samples from the door handle, steering wheel, and seat fabric. One partial fingerprint appeared on the exterior of the driver's door, faint, smudged, and incomplete. A K9 unit was deployed at 10 p.m. The dogs picked up a scent leading across the road and into an open field. The trail ended abruptly after 40 yards, fading into the frozen soil. The handlers described it as if the scent had simply vanished. Inside the vehicle, everything appeared orderly. The seat position matched her height. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken glass, no struggle, no blood. Her bag was zipped, and her pager rested on the seat beside it. Her cell phone records showed no outgoing or incoming calls after 11:58 p.m., the precise moment her digital trail stopped. The investigators extended the search radius. Nearby ditches, wooded areas, and the shoreline of Lake Huron were examined under floodlights. Volunteers from the community joined the effort, combing through brush and drainage culverts. Nothing was found. By sunrise, the frost had turned to thin ice. The hospital parking lot was rechecked. Every security camera, every staff log, every maintenance record was reviewed. The footage confirmed only one exit, Vanessa's. No one followed her. No other car left within 10 minutes of hers. Reeves questioned every hospital employee who worked that night. All confirmed that Vanessa appeared normal, tired but composed. She spoke briefly to a co-worker about a patient's medication before leaving. There were no arguments, no suspicious encounters. The investigation widened to local highways and nearby towns. Roadblocks were established at major intersections. Officers reviewed surveillance footage from gas stations and convenience stores along her route. None captured her vehicle after 11:50 p.m. It was as though her car had appeared and disappeared in the same instant. Detectives interviewed truck drivers who passed through the area that night. One recalled seeing a car pulled over on Route 25 but could not describe the color or license plate. Another mentioned noticing flashing hazard lights but was unsure of the exact location. Both statements were too vague to confirm. Forensic technicians completed a full inspection of Vanessa's car. No fingerprints matched anyone in law enforcement databases. The single smudge on the door remained unidentifiable. No foreign fibers, footprints, or tire impressions connected to another vehicle. Reeves stood at the edge of the field as the final search team packed their equipment. The air was still, heavy with the sound of wind through dry grass. He looked at the dark stretch of road leading away from the scene. Somewhere between the hospital and that silent shoulder, Vanessa Miller had disappeared without leaving a trace. As the last patrol car left the site, Reeves returned to the evidence table. He examined the photographs one final time, the unlocked door, the untouched purse, the half-frozen ground. Then he looked at the fingerprint lifted from the metal surface. It was the only physical clue they had, and it led nowhere. Detective Alan Reeves took command of the case within hours of the missing person report. He had worked homicides for 17 years, but this one felt different from the start. There was no chaos, no visible violence, no clear line between ordinary life and disappearance. He began where every investigation begins, with the last people to see Vanessa Miller alive. Her co-workers at St. Clair Regional Medical Center gathered in the staff lounge, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They repeated the same story. Vanessa ended her shift, signed out at 11:47 p.m., and walked to the parking lot alone. No one followed her, No one saw her leave the grounds. Forensics officer Dana Cole processed the hospital footage frame by frame. The grainy black and white video offered little. The image of Vanessa walking through the corridor was clear enough to confirm her identity, but beyond the exit doors, the screen turned to static. The outdoor camera near the staff lot had malfunctioned 2 days earlier. It was logged for maintenance, but the repair never happened. Reeves ordered interviews with security staff, janitors, and maintenance workers. None reported anything unusual. One recalled hearing the buzz of lights flickering in the parking area, but no shouts, no sound of a struggle. The camera system logs confirmed no vehicles entered or exited after Vanessa's. The search perimeter extended outward from the location where her car was found. Patrol officers and volunteers walked through wooded trails, drainage ditches, and nearby industrial lots. Helicopters scanned the shoreline of Lake Huron. Divers entered the water near the old boatyard, but visibility was poor and nothing surfaced. Rumors spread quickly through the small Michigan community. Some claimed a man had been seen following Vanessa days before. Others whispered about a mysterious caller who had asked for her during a late-night shift. Reeves tracked every lead, but none held weight. No evidence supported the talk of a stalker. Dana Cole continued processing the fingerprint from the car door. The partial print was too blurred to identify, though she preserved it carefully for future testing. The rest of the car yielded nothing. No fibers, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The case was slipping into uncertainty. Reporters gathered outside the sheriff's office demanding updates. Reeves stood before cameras and urged patience, stating that all available resources were being used. Behind the public calm, frustration was growing. Every test, every interview, every search returned the same result. Nothing. At the hospital, co-workers organized candlelight vigils. They placed photographs of Vanessa on the front steps, candles flickering in the cold air. The nurses who had shared her shifts stood silently, holding hands, the sound of distant sirens echoing through the night. The gesture was meant for hope, but beneath it lay fear. If Vanessa could vanish without a trace, so could anyone. Reeves spent long nights in his office surrounded by maps and evidence files. The whiteboard displayed her final route, a straight line from the hospital to the place where the car was found. Between those 2 points lay 2 miles of unbroken road and one impossible mystery. He replayed the timeline again and again. The clock out at 11:47. The car leaving at 11:49, the phone signal ending at 11:58, 9 minutes of silence. Nothing in those minutes made sense. Dana entered his office one evening, setting the fingerprint report on the desk. "No match," she said quietly. Reeves nodded without speaking. He studied the image. The faint swirl of a print half-formed, the single clue that refused to lead anywhere. When the lights dimmed and the rest of the department went home, Reeves remained. He stared at the board filled with dates, photographs, and notes that formed no pattern. The lines between them led nowhere, the gaps growing wider with every passing day. He stepped back, looking at the frozen moment of Vanessa walking down that corridor, the final clear frame before static. Something about the timeline, he thought, felt wrong, and that feeling would not leave him. The disappearance of Vanessa Miller spread through Port Huron like a quiet storm. By the end of the first week, her face was everywhere, on supermarket bulletin boards, gas station doors, and the walls of the hospital where she had worked for years. The posters showed her in her nurse's uniform, smiling faintly, eyes steady. At first, people stopped to look. They read the dates, the description, the word missing printed in bold red letters. But as days passed, the posters began to curl at the edges, soaked by rain and wind. The faces that once paused to study them started walking by. The hospital community responded with silence and structure. A memorial bench was placed near the staff entrance, engraved with her name. Nurses left flowers beside it before every shift. The bench became a point of ritual, not mourning, but remembrance of someone who had simply vanished between 2 familiar places. Neighbors in Vanessa's apartment complex began locking their doors earlier. Some installed new deadbolts. Others kept their curtains drawn after dark. Fear moved through the quiet streets, not loud or panicked, but steady and constant. People spoke softly in grocery aisles, asking the same questions in different words. Marianne Miller, Vanessa's younger sister, stood before reporters 1 week after the search began. Her voice was calm, her statements brief. She thanked the police, the volunteers, and the hospital staff. When a journalist asked if she believed Vanessa was still alive, she paused before answering. "We do not know," she said simply. Then she walked away. For a time, the town waited for updates, press releases, briefings, breaking headlines that never came. Search efforts slowed as snow covered the open fields. By the third week, volunteers had returned to their jobs, and news crews began to leave. The flyers remained, fading into the background of everyday life. Inside the sheriff's office, the case file thickened, but no new evidence appeared. Each unanswered call, each empty lead added another layer of quiet resignation. By spring, Vanessa's name was no longer front-page news. Other stories filled the space she once held, but in the corners of Port Huron, in the hospital hallways, the frozen parking lot, and the bench by the entrance, her absence still lingered. A silence that refused to fade. The first lead came from a truck stop off Interstate 94. A drifter, thin and disoriented, claimed he had seen a woman matching Vanessa Miller's description the night she disappeared. He said she was walking along the shoulder near the exit ramp, clutching her coat against the wind. Deputies brought him in, but his story unraveled under questioning. He had been miles away that night, caught on a store camera at a different location. Another dead end. A week later, a nurse from St. Clair Regional reported receiving strange phone calls. A man's voice, calm and unfamiliar, asked about night shifts and parking schedules. The caller ID showed nothing, only static. Detectives traced the number to a payphone outside a diner 20 miles away. No fingerprints, no witness, no usable footage. Another lead turned to dust. In the evidence room, brown paper bags began to fill the shelves. Fibers from Vanessa's uniform, soil samples from the parking lot, a partial footprint near the edge of the wooded path. Each item was labeled, sealed, and stored, fragments of a story that refused to form a whole. Forensic analysis brought no clarity. The single fingerprint lifted from Vanessa's car was smudged and incomplete. DNA traces were too degraded for 1999's limited testing methods. The laboratory report came back with the same line, printed in black ink, insufficient sample for conclusive result. Detective Alan Reeves read that sentence more times than he could count. He had led dozens of cases before, but this one stayed with him. Each time he tried to move forward, the evidence looped back to nowhere. Over the next 2 years, tips continued to arrive. Sightings from out of state, anonymous letters claiming hidden knowledge, psychics offering visions. Reeves logged them all, but none survived verification. Every trail ended the same way, inconclusive. The media coverage slowed. Reporters stopped calling. Newer cases filled the headlines. Fresher crimes, more immediate grief. Vanessa's name appeared less frequently, tucked deep within anniversary articles or remembered briefly in community forums. Within the sheriff's office, the rhythm of investigation faded. Officers were reassigned. The task force disbanded quietly. The official line became simple. No new developments at this time. But Reeves did not let it go. He kept Vanessa's case file in a cardboard box beneath his desk, not stored, not forgotten. Occasionally, he opened it at night when the office was empty, tracing the sequence of times, phone records, and photographs pinned in plastic sleeves. He believed something in the timeline was off, something small enough to miss, but large enough to matter. The others had moved on, but Reeves could not. The unanswered questions pressed on him. Why were the car keys missing? Why had there been no struggle? Why had her phone gone dark exactly 11 minutes after clocking out? The numbers lined up, but the logic did not. Winter returned to Michigan, hard, and gray. On November 17th, 2 years to the day since Vanessa vanished, the hospital parking lot looked almost unchanged. Snow drifted across the asphalt, collecting in thin white layers over faded yellow lines. The same overhead light flickered near the staff exit, a rhythmic blink against the darkness. Inside the hospital, new nurses walked through the corridors where Vanessa once worked. Few remembered her now. The break room where she left her half-full thermos had been repainted. The bench outside, carved with her name, stood under the falling snow. Reeves sat in his car across the street that night, engine running, watching the lights of St. Clair Regional. He told no one he was there. He waited, staring at the entrance, as if expecting her to walk out again, calm, tired, and alive. The snow kept falling. The same light kept flickering, and the same questions remained unanswered. Time moved forward, but the evidence did not. By 2002, the Vanessa Miller case file had been sealed, catalogued, and pushed to the far end of the records room. The once active investigation had settled into silence, a box among hundreds, labeled, dated, and slowly forgotten. Detective Alan Reeves retired that spring. He cleared his desk, returned his badge, and left behind 3 cardboard boxes. 2 contained standard case materials. The third held only Vanessa's file. He could not throw it away, yet he no longer had the authority to reopen it. Before leaving, he placed it carefully on a shelf, out of sight but within reach. Years slipped by. Offices were renovated, walls repainted, computers replaced. The staff changed, names rotated on office doors, but the box remained, its edges softening, its label fading. Inside were the same unsolved fragments: a fingerprint, a footprint, a phone record, frozen in time. By 2010, forensic science had changed. Databases expanded, testing accuracy improved, and old evidence began to find new voices. Across the state, cold cases reopened one by one, some finding resolution after decades of silence. But Vanessa's file stayed untouched. No one had requested its review. That changed in 2018 when Detective Megan Ortiz joined the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office. 32 years old, methodical, and trained in digital forensics, she had a habit of revisiting forgotten files. She found Vanessa's case buried in the archive logs while running a department-wide audit. The missing nurse from 1999, one of the few cases with no trace, no closure, and no conclusive evidence. Ortiz opened the box on a winter afternoon. The paper smelled faintly of dust and old glue. Inside were the same photographs Reeves once studied: the empty parking lot, the car door left ajar, the thermos still on the hospital counter. Nothing dramatic, nothing new. But something about the timeline drew her attention. She noticed that Vanessa's cell phone records ended at 11:58 p.m., but the parking lot security feed stopped at 11:50, an 8-minute gap. In 1999, those missing minutes meant nothing. In 2018, they mattered. Data could now be cross-checked, synchronized, and digitally enhanced. Ortiz requested the full case for digital conversion. Each report was scanned, tagged, and uploaded into the new county database. The fingerprint sample, once dismissed as inconclusive, was digitally enhanced through updated forensic imaging. For the first time in 19 years, the evidence was alive again. Vanessa's family had grown older. Her sister Marianne now lived quietly near Lakeport, seldom speaking to the press. Every November, she still placed a single white rose on the memorial bench at the hospital. Reporters rarely noticed. The story had become a local memory, something whispered about, not discussed. The retesting process was slow. Weeks turned into months. Ortiz moved through the data with patience, studying every document and comparing each with the new digital results. Most returned the same verdict: no match. The soil traces, the fibers, the footprints, all remained ambiguous. Still, she persisted. In early 2020, a breakthrough came quietly. The Michigan State Police Forensic Lab contacted her with preliminary results from the enhanced fingerprint scan. The technician's voice was cautious, almost reluctant. "It is not a full match," he said, "but the system shows partial alignment with a local record. We are rerunning it for confirmation." Ortiz wrote the name down, even though it was not yet verified. She recognized the initials from a minor theft case logged years after Vanessa disappeared, a man who had lived within 10 miles of the hospital at the time. The report was not official, and she knew better than to draw conclusions. But after 2 decades of silence, it was the first signal, faint, partial, but real. She closed the file and looked across the office. Reeves's old desk was still there, its surface worn smooth. The same window overlooked the parking lot. Snow was falling again, drifting across the glass in thin white streaks. Ortiz leaned back in her chair, the phone still warm in her hand. For 21 years, the evidence had said nothing. Now for the first time, it had spoken, just enough to make the silence feel fragile. The call ended with a single promise from the lab: "We will confirm within the week." She placed the receiver down and stared at the box. The same evidence. The same unanswered questions, but now a name waiting to surface. The email arrived at 7:42 a.m. on a quiet January morning in 2021. Subject line: Fingerprint reanalysis. Positive identification pending. Detective Megan Ortiz had been reviewing an unrelated case when the notification appeared. The sender was the Michigan State Police Forensic Division. Attached was a short report and a single sentence that froze her in place. Enhanced reconstruction confirms partial and secondary ridge alignment with Daniel Crowe, 99.87%. Probability. 2 decades of silence had just cracked open. Daniel Crowe. The name was unfamiliar to most, but a search in the local employment records told its story. He had once worked as a maintenance technician at St. Clair Regional Medical Center, the same hospital where Vanessa Miller finished her last shift in November 1999. His employment ended abruptly in January 2000. Officially, voluntary resignation. No follow-up. No interview. He had simply left. Ortiz sat back in her chair and read the report again, line by line. The new AI-assisted fingerprint system had used ridge reconstruction, a method unavailable in the 1990s, to rebuild partial smudges from older cases. It compared the newly processed image against millions of digital records. The result was precise, not speculative. For 21 years, the single print on Vanessa's car door had been useless. Now it had a name attached. She called the forensic lab directly. The technician confirmed the result in a calm, measured tone. "We reran it twice," he said. "It holds." Ortiz opened a new file and began assembling a timeline. Crowe's last known address in Michigan was an apartment complex 15 minutes from the hospital. He had no immediate family listed, few social ties, and a single prior arrest for misdemeanor assault in 1997, a bar altercation that never reached conviction. After 2000, his trail went blank. Through the state employment database, Ortiz located a record under a similar name, Daniel Cross, registered in Wisconsin in 2003. The date of birth matched. The social security digits aligned except for one transposed number, likely intentional. He was now listed as an auto mechanic in a town called Iron Falls. Population under 6,000. She verified it twice before calling her supervisor. The following hours unfolded quietly. The kind of precision work that defines real investigations. Ortiz contacted Wisconsin authorities, requested verification of Crowe's identity, and initiated a background inquiry through the National Crime Information Center. Each system took minutes to respond, but the rhythm of waiting felt longer. Screens flickered, progress bars crawled forward, and the picture grew clearer. By midday, confirmation arrived. Daniel Crowe had lived in Iron Falls for nearly 18 years, under a slightly altered name, with no known relatives. His employment record was stable, his taxes regular, his life unremarkable. It was the ordinariness that made it unsettling. Ortiz reviewed the original case photographs one more time. The print had been found on the exterior handle of Vanessa's car, driver's side, partial ridge, lower quadrant. Crowe's maintenance position in 1999 would have given him access to the hospital parking lot and key areas near staff exits. No record indicated he ever interacted with Vanessa directly. But in a small hospital, paths crossed easily. The realization came slowly, almost reluctantly. This was not coincidence. She ordered a full review of his employment logs from 1999, cross-checking schedules, maintenance requests, and shift records. The pattern aligned too perfectly. On the night Vanessa disappeared, Crow had been assigned to maintenance in the same wing she worked, the East Surgical Ward. His shift ended at 11:30 p.m. Vanessa clocked out at 11:47, 17 minutes apart. Ortiz sat still for a long moment, the hum of the office filling the silence. For years, this case had been defined by absence, of proof, of progress, of closure. Now, finally, it had a direction. She notified command and began the paperwork for interstate coordination. The process was deliberate, methodical, bound by legal procedure. Every step documented, every confirmation verified. Outside, Michigan winter pressed against the windows, gray skies, drifting snow, the quiet weight of cold air. Ortiz closed the office blinds and started packing her travel case. That evening, she met with the district attorney to outline the next phase: interview, surveillance, and potential extradition. The conversation was brief and controlled. There was no declaration of victory, no excitement, just focus. By nightfall, Ortiz was on the road. The route from Port Huron to Iron Falls stretched over 300 miles of frozen highway, lined with bare trees and flickering rest stop lights. Her car heater hummed softly, the sound steady against the wind. She replayed the case in her mind: the parking lot, the fingerprint, the 2 missing keys, the silence that had lasted 21 years. Each detail returned with new meaning. The windshield reflected a dim stretch of light as snow began to fall again. She thought of Vanessa Miller, the nurse who never came home. The unanswered questions that shaped 2 decades of investigation. And for the first time, those questions had begun to form answers. Somewhere ahead, in a small Wisconsin town, a man lived an ordinary life under an ordinary name. But the past had finally reached him. Ortiz kept her eyes on the road, the white lines fading beneath the tires. For the first time in 21 years, there was motion, not the illusion of progress, but the real thing. The evidence had spoken. Now, it was time to listen. The office was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. Detective Megan Ortiz sat alone, surrounded by stacks of files that had not been opened in decades. The air smelled of paper, ink, and old dust, the scent of stories waiting to be finished. On her desk lay the Vanessa Miller file, reopened, reorganized, and alive again. The fingerprint had given her a name, but Ortiz needed more. She did not want coincidence. She wanted proof. She began to rebuild the investigation from the first page. Every report, every witness statement, every photograph was re-examined in order. She moved chronologically, careful not to skip a single line. Most of the evidence was familiar: the abandoned car, the missing keys, the incomplete fingerprint. But in the middle of an old maintenance log, she found a connection that had been buried by time. The entry was dated November 16th, 1999, 1 day before Vanessa disappeared. The record described a request for maintenance in the hospital parking lot, specifically the southeast section used by night staff. The report mentioned flickering lights and security cameras temporarily offline for repairs. The technician assigned to the task was Daniel Crow. Ortiz checked the signature at the bottom of the report. It matched the name on the fingerprint file. She turned to the next page, an internal memo written by Vanessa herself. It was short, formal, and routine. Parking lot lights near staff exit continued to flicker. Concern for visibility during night shifts. The handwriting was neat, steady, professional. The report had been submitted to hospital administration at 10:14 a.m. on the same day Crow signed the service ticket. Vanessa had filed the complaint. Crow had responded. It was a small detail, easily dismissed in the original investigation, but now it stood like a fracture line through the timeline. He had been there, not by chance, not by rumor, but by documented assignment. Ortiz highlighted the entries, cross-referenced them with time logs, and confirmed that Crow's shift ended at 11:30 p.m., 17 minutes before Vanessa clocked out. The alignment was exact. She felt the weight of quiet confirmation settle in. Not relief, not triumph, just the heavy recognition that the pieces finally fit. Ortiz kept reading through Reeves's old notes. His handwriting appeared in the margins, sharp and controlled. Phrases like lighting issue, unresolved, and timeline inconsistency, recheck tech staff. He had seen it too. He had written it down. But the technology of his time had not allowed him to go further. Now, with the benefit of years and progress, Ortiz could see what he could not. The missing key, the unlocked car door, the smudge of a fingerprint, they all pointed back to the same man. Crow's maintenance log showed one more repair ticket filed later that week. Light repaired and operational. The report was marked as complete, but the timestamp revealed it had been logged remotely after he had already left Michigan. She stared at that final line, the cursor blinking beside it on her screen. It was not proof of guilt, but it was proximity, the kind that investigators learn never to ignore. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. The world beyond the office was gray and still, the faint sound of traffic humming in the distance. Inside, Ortiz moved quietly between documents, arranging them into order: complaint, service ticket, fingerprint, timeline. The evidence formed a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. She paused and looked across the room at Reeves's old desk. The same desk where he had sat 20 years earlier, surrounded by unanswered questions. Ortiz wondered if he had ever known how close he had been. Every investigator who came before her had added a layer to the story. A line, a note, a photograph. And now, after 22 years, those fragments were aligning into a single truth. She closed the folder, sealed the new evidence summary, and wrote one final line at the bottom of her report. Suspect verification complete. Request interrogation warrant. Ortiz leaned back in her chair. The lights above flickered once, faintly, briefly, almost like a reminder of the night everything began. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, after 22 years, the silence might finally break. She turned off her computer, gathered the files, and walked toward the door. Outside, the winter air waited, sharp, still, and heavy with unfinished history. The case that had once gone cold was warm again. And somewhere in Wisconsin, the man who thought the past had forgotten him was about to hear it knock. The interrogation room was small and colorless. The walls were a shade of gray that neither reflected nor absorbed light. A clock ticked steadily above the one-way glass, each second sharp and deliberate. Daniel Crow sat at the table with his hands folded. His posture was still, his expression unreadable. Years had weathered his face, deep lines across the brow, hair thinning at the edges, a roughness earned from years of manual work. He looked like a man accustomed to silence. Detective Megan Ortiz entered the room without a word. She carried only a thin folder and a cup of water. Her movements were calm, deliberate, procedural. The camera in the corner clicked to life. The red light blinked. The clock read 10:06 a.m. The air between them was motionless. For hours, Ortiz maintained a steady rhythm, questions, pauses, and the slow weight of silence filling the gaps. She spoke evenly, without accusation, reading through the evidence like a sequence of facts: the fingerprint, the maintenance logs, the repair order, the service ticket signed by his hand. Crow listened, offering short answers that said nothing and revealed less. He denied nothing directly, but he confirmed nothing either. His voice was low, almost flat, each sentence ending in the same monotone. The room remained sterile, no movement, no sound beyond the clock. Ortiz shifted her approach slowly. She laid the photographs on the table: the hospital parking lot, Vanessa's abandoned car, the report she had filed about the flickering lights. The fluorescent glare reflected off the glossy paper. Crow's eyes moved briefly over each image, then away. Minutes passed. Ortiz continued, her voice unwavering, tracing the line of evidence from 1999 to the present. The AI-assisted fingerprint reconstruction, the verified employment overlap, the complaint Vanessa wrote, her signature beside the date. She described everything in the same neutral tone, as though reading from an archive. At 1:17 p.m., the silence broke. Crow exhaled slowly and asked for water. He drank, set the cup down, and leaned back. His eyes were tired, but his expression did not change. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. There was no emotion in it, No defense, no denial. He said he remembered the night clearly. The cold air, the flickering light above the parking lot, the echo of his boots on the pavement. He had waited near the staff entrance, intending to speak to her before she left. He said he had tried to talk to Vanessa several times before, brief conversations, nothing improper. But that night, she told him to stop following her. She turned to leave. He reached for her arm. She pulled away. He grabbed her again. There was a struggle, short, confused, and clumsy. He said she slipped. He said she hit her head on the ground. He said there was blood, but not much. Then there was silence. He crouched beside her and realized she was not breathing. He did not call for help. He did not alert security. Instead, panic took hold. He looked around the lot, saw no one, and dragged her toward the maintenance shed. From there, he carried her body in his truck to the edge of an abandoned boatyard near the river. He said he left her there, near the waterline, beneath discarded tarps and rusted equipment. Then he drove home. The next day, he returned to work as if nothing had happened. He finished the maintenance report, marked the lighting issue resolved, and handed it to his supervisor. By the end of the week, he had resigned and left the state. He never went back. As he spoke, the room remained still. Ortiz did not interrupt. She did not react. The only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system and the slow click of the clock marking each passing second. Crow's words came out without hesitation, like a man reading from memory rather than conscience. There was no apology, no justification, only detail. When he finished, he looked at the wall instead of her. The clock read 2:43 p.m. Ortiz closed her notebook and gathered the photographs. She did not speak for several seconds. Then she nodded once, signaling to the officers behind the glass. The door opened. 2 deputies entered the room and placed handcuffs around Crow's wrists. He did not resist. The room emptied, leaving Ortiz alone for a moment. She looked at the chair where he had been sitting, the cup of water half finished, the photos still faintly reflecting light. Everything felt smaller, quieter. After 22 years, the case that began with a missing nurse in a dark parking lot had finally found its voice. But the sound of truth was not loud. It was hollow. Ortiz stood, walked toward the one-way glass, and paused. Her reflection appeared faintly against the mirrored surface. Her expression neutral. Her eyes fixed on something far away, behind the glass. Technicians logged timestamps, sealed the recording, and marked the confession for evidence. The process was mechanical, practiced, almost routine. She turned toward the door, hand on the knob, and looked back once more at the empty room. Nothing had moved. Yet everything had changed. The confession had not brought relief. It had only confirmed what silence had been saying all along. Ortiz stepped into the hallway, the sound of her shoes echoing against the tile. She did not look back again. The investigation was complete. The file could finally close. But closure and peace were not the same. As she walked past the observation glass, her reflection passed across its surface, brief, fragmented, and unreadable. The clock inside the room continued to tick, each second, marking the distance between truth and the years it took to find it. Daniel Crow was charged with second-degree murder on December 14, 2021, the official statement from the St. Clair County Sheriff's office was brief, a single page released to the press at 9:00 a.m. It confirmed that a confession had been obtained, that the suspect was in custody, and that a search operation was underway in the area Crow had described. Within hours, investigators converged on the abandoned boatyard north of Port Huron, where frozen mud and overgrown weeds still marked the boundary between land and river. Snow had settled unevenly across the ground. Beneath one of the rusted storage sheds, officers uncovered fragments of weathered tarps and compacted soil. It took less than 2 hours to find what they were looking for. A skeletal structure, fragile and partially buried, was uncovered exactly where Crow had said it would be. Forensic teams worked in near silence, brushing away the dirt, measuring the site and marking evidence flags that rippled faintly in the wind. There was no dramatic discovery, no moment of revelation, only quiet precision. One piece of truth lifted from 22 years of silence. Dental records confirmed the remains as belonging to Vanessa Miller. The official identification came 3 days later. The sheriff's office released a second statement. The remains recovered at the former boat storage facility off River Road have been positively identified as those of Vanessa Lynn Miller, missing since November 12, 1999. The line between past and present finally closed. News of the recovery spread quickly across Port Huron. But unlike the early days of her disappearance, there were no crowds, no reporters camped outside the hospital, no breaking news banners flashing across television screens. The community had changed. The people who once searched the fields now watched quietly from living rooms and office break rooms. In the small diner near the medical center, where Vanessa used to stop for coffee after her shifts, someone pinned the newspaper clipping beside the register. Customers read it in silence and moved on. The hospital staff erected fresh flowers beside the memorial bench that had long stood near the staff entrance. The brass plaque, tarnished by years of weather, still bore her name. Now, for the first time, the question of what happened had an answer. Detective Megan Ortiz attended the press conference but did not speak. She stood off to the side, her coat buttoned against the wind, watching as the sheriff summarized the findings. Cameras flashed briefly, then stopped. The reporters' questions were short. No one raised their voice. Justice, after so long, had arrived quietly. Across town, former Detective Alan Reeves watched the same press conference from his living room. He sat alone, the television light flickering across the framed photographs and old case files he had never thrown away. His hands were unsteady, but his eyes did not leave the screen. When Ortiz's name was mentioned, he nodded once, a faint, private acknowledgement between two detectives separated by decades but bound by the same pursuit. Later that week, Ortiz accompanied the recovery team as they transported Vanessa's remains to the county medical examiner's office. The evidence bags were sealed and labeled, the process exact. Every movement was documented, every chain of custody recorded. The case that had begun with uncertainty ended in careful procedural closure. The burial took place in late December. The sky was pale, the ground hard with frost. Vanessa's family gathered near a small cemetery overlooking Lake Huron, the same shoreline she used to jog beside in the early mornings before her shifts. Ortiz attended but remained apart, standing several paces from the family, her hands clasped in front of her coat. There were no speeches, no reporters, only the sound of the minister's voice carried by the wind. When the ceremony ended, people dispersed slowly, their movements quiet, deliberate. The sound of footsteps on frozen ground was the only noise left. Ortiz lingered for a moment longer, watching as the casket was lowered. For 22 years, Vanessa Miller had been a name on a file, a photograph in a folder, a question without an answer. Now she was at rest. Back at the sheriff's office, the case file was closed and archived. The original evidence box, its corners worn, its labels faded, was sealed one final time. Inside it rested the documents, photographs, and reports that had once defined 2 decades of uncertainty. On the front of the box, Ortiz added one last note in black ink. Case resolved, December 2021. The story returned to silence. Port Huron continued as it always had. The same streets, the same hospital parking lot, the same winter wind moving across the lake. People passed the bench outside the staff entrance without stopping, the brass plaque catching only a faint glint of light. In the end, there was no sense of triumph, only the muted recognition of truth finally spoken. The years had not softened the loss. They had only aged it, turned it into something quieter, heavier, harder to measure. At dusk, as the last of the daylight faded, a cold wind swept through the cemetery. The camera would have followed it, over the empty road, across the bare trees, and down to the stone that now bore her name, Vanessa Lynn Miller, 1964 to 1999, finally found, never forgotten. The snow began to fall again, thin and soundless, and the story of her disappearance ended where it began, under a November sky quiet and cold, with only the wind to carry what remained of her memory. 22 years passed, between the night Vanessa Miller disappeared and the moment her case was finally closed. In that time, evidence had yellowed, witnesses had aged, and memories had faded to whispers. What remained constant was silence, the quiet that sits between unanswered questions, and the truth that comes too late to change anything. Justice had arrived, but it did not feel like victory. Files were archived, press reports were printed, and the courthouse issued a final docket entry, State of Michigan versus Daniel Crowe, concluded. The paperwork was simple, procedural, unremarkable. Yet behind every line of text was the story of a woman who vanished after finishing her shift, and of a community that once searched, then forgot, then remembered again. The truth had been found. But time had already taken too much. In the years between 1999 and 2021, technology changed, investigators came and went, and the world moved forward. But Vanessa's name stayed frozen in one moment, a nurse leaving work on a cold November night, never reaching home. Every advancement in forensic science, every database update, every small procedural shift eventually led back to that parking lot, that single walk to her car. Detective Megan Ortiz's report ended with one final statement. Persistence is sometimes the only witness left. That sentence captured the heart of what the case had become. Persistence, not passion, not emotion, not even hope, just steady, methodical endurance. The kind of work that does not make headlines, that moves forward in silence until a single piece of overlooked evidence finally speaks. The confession gave answers, but not comfort. Daniel Crowe's words had stripped away speculation, yet they offered nothing that resembled meaning. His motive, rejection, frustration, a moment of anger, explained the act, but not the emptiness it left behind. There was no revelation about why certain lives intersect at the wrong time, only the fact that they did. Crowe remained in custody, facing a sentence that could not balance 2 lost decades. Time had already claimed what punishment could not repair. For Vanessa's family, closure was not relief. It was an ending without resolution, the knowledge of what happened, but not why it had to happen. Her sister Marianne issued a brief statement through the sheriff's office. "We are grateful for answers. We will always miss her, nothing more. No interviews, no public appearances, just silence returning to the place where grief once spoke loudly." The community moved on again, this time more quietly. There were no new memorials, no public ceremonies. Life continued with the subdued rhythm of normalcy restored. But every so often, someone passing through the hospital parking lot would glance toward the bench with the tarnished brass plaque. It still caught light on certain mornings, a small reflection that disappeared as quickly as it came. Cold cases often end this way, with truth uncovered, but time unrecovered. For investigators, the lesson was procedural. Archive nothing without review. Trust no timeline without question. For those who remembered Vanessa, the lesson was harder. That absence can linger longer than memory, that some stories do not fade even when they are finished. The silence that followed the case was not empty. It carried the weight of 2 decades of waiting, of every unanswered call, every dead lead, every file reopened and reclosed. It was the sound of persistence that refused to give up, even when no one else was listening. At the sheriff's office, Ortiz visited the evidence room one last time before transferring to a new unit. She stood before the shelf where Vanessa's case box rested. The label was clean and new, the handwriting still sharp, resolved. She did not open it. She did not need to. The work was finished, even if the feeling of completion never arrived. Outside, winter pressed against the glass, snow falling in thin streaks. It looked almost the same as the night Vanessa vanished. The same gray sky, the same frozen light over the parking lot. Only the years in between had changed. The story that began with her final shift now ended in stillness. Cold cases teach us that time can hide truth, but not erase it. Evidence decays, but persistence remembers. The distance between disappearance and discovery is measured not just in years, but in the weight of all that remains unspoken. In the end, what endures is not the violence or the crime, but the quiet determination of those who refuse to let a name fade. Vanessa Miller's story does not close with peace. It closes with truth, imperfect, incomplete, but real. The most haunting part of any cold case is not what we never knew. It is how long we live with what we almost forgot.